Well, good afternoon. Welcome to Sealaska Heritage Institute. My name is Chuck Smythe, and I'm the director of the Culture and History Department. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first in our series of events celebrating Native American Heritage Month this year. We're very pleased to have a lecture by Dr. Steve Langdon, who I'll introduce in a moment, but I wish to also mention next week we have a couple of events. If you don't know, I'd like to inform you of those. On Tuesday, we'll be having a special event during the lunch hour with showing items from our collection from Dr. Walter Sobolof's collection, and including his clan hat. You can see an up-close view of that, and other items relating to his legacy that we're fortunate to have here. And then there's another lecture which is kind of an appropriate follow-up to Steve's talk today, which is talking about some of the same events and more from the perspective of a geographer who has collected a lot of documentation about this and other forms of map making and boundary drawing throughout the state by John Cloud. The title of that lecture is The Treaty of Cession as Seen Through the Lenses of Art, Cartography, and Photography.
What's the date on that one?
Wednesday, next Wednesday, same time, same place. So Dr. Stephen J. Langdon is Professor Emeritus from the Department of Anthropology at the University of Alaska Anchorage. He was there almost 40 years, from 1976 to 2014. His kind of second home is in Klukwan Craig area, where he has been returning since 1975 or so, or 4. Was that the first time? Yeah,
73. Yeah.
73. But he's well known throughout the region for his research on many topics: subsistence, on documenting traditional ecological knowledge of salmon fishing and relationships between humans and salmon, and other types of things like halibut and now sea otter. But he's very well known for his activities in this region, but also throughout the state. He pioneered research into the negative implications and effects of limited entry on Native communities and rural communities in general, but he played an important role in the development of the Community Developed Quota System, the CDQ program. In 2012, he received the Bullock Prize from the University of Alaska Foundation for excellence in contributions to Alaska, and this year he was awarded the Denali Prize from Alaska Federation of Natives, which is awarded to the non-native person who has demonstrated strong commitment, dedication, and service to the Alaska Native community and to rural Alaska. So we're very pleased to have him here. The title of his talk is Kaalaxch Endeavors, Preeminent Jilk Leader and the Coming of the Americans. He will discuss the career of this individual, otherwise known as Shotridge, or Shotridge, and his efforts to interact and sustain Tlingit sovereignty in the face of military endeavors to use force, exert force to enforce their authority and their presence in the region. We're happy to have Steve here, and welcome, Dr. Langdon.
Well, it's very nice to be back in Juneau, and especially here at SHI again. I would like to express my appreciation to Dr. Rosita Worl, the president of Sealaska Heritage Institute, for the invitation to present this talk. And also thanks to Chuck Smythe, both for his introduction and for his assistance in various ways. Let me begin by commenting that to the members of the Jilk and Klukwan who may be in the audience, these remarks are delivered humbly and with respect and honor for your heritage. I realize they address difficult topics. If they include errors, oversights, or misrepresentations, I sincerely apologize and request your forgiveness and solicit your observations and comments. I'd also like to acknowledge that the comments that I'm making today are certainly informed by previous researchers. Dr. Rosita Worl's research on some of early encounters, the work of Daniel Henry in the Upper Lynn Canal communities, and also historian Andrew Higgs. So, events that occurred in the past are conceived of differently by persons depending upon their background, experience, and knowledge. There are a number of ways to highlight events from the past. Examples are anniversary, remembrance, commemoration, celebration. For most public forms of memorial attention, typically favorable views of the events are held by those marking them. However, those same events may have no meaning or an opposite meaning to others. In these cases, the event might be ignored or imbued with an entirely different meaning. Consider October 18th, 2017, less than a month ago. The so-called sesquicentennial of Alaska becoming a part of the United States. The state of Alaska has identified this year and date as worthy of attention of various kinds. Other groups, such as the University of Alaska Anchorage, have organized events under the label of celebration for this occasion. The transfer of Alaska to U.S. jurisdiction and subsequent actions by the government of the United States towards Indigenous people of Alaska require examination and exposure as an absolutely essential component of considering the 150 years of U.S. jurisdiction. The purpose of my remarks is to present information on the manner in which Tlingit leaders regarded the American presence and asserted their rights to lands, resources, and cultural processes in their homeland, Tlingit Ani. While my primary focus is on one remarkable individual, there were numerous other Tlingit leaders whose names will appear from time to time, who actively confronted the U.S. presence and sought through their efforts a relationship of mutual respect based on the recognition of the inherent rights of the Tlingit people in their homeland. My remarks today may provide you with some insights about why descendants of Alaska Natives who first met the American newcomers 150 years ago might see the Tongass Seward shame pole as a more relevant expression of their sentiments than the Seward statue here in Juneau. Nope. Okay. Got to be turned on. Okay. The Alaska Federation of Natives, the most influential statewide institution for Alaska Natives, held their 2017 convention from October 19th to 21st in Anchorage. The theme of the convention this year was strength in unity, leadership, partnerships, and social justice. Yet under those particular topics, during the convention, none of its leaders, the president, Julie Kitka, nor the co-chairs, Will Mayo, Anna Hoffman, made reference to the sesquicentennial. A review of the program agenda reveals no items addressing this anniversary during that time period, during this convention. Of 37 resolutions considered, none addressed the transfer itself in any way, but many dealt with the issues that confront current relations between Alaska Natives and the state of Alaska and the U.S. government. But other Alaska Natives have raised their voices concerning this event. Dr. Rosita Worl has expressed her views on the inappropriateness and insensitivity of a statue to Secretary William H. Seward being placed on public property, honoring a man whose interest in Alaska was rooted deeply in the values of American expansionism and imperialism. known as the Doctrine of Manifest Destiny. She seeks a truth and reconciliation process similar to Canada to address the many continuing unresolved issues negatively impinging on Alaska Natives and their relationship with the state and federal governments, in the aim of initiating a process of respectful collaboration on shared interests moving forward. On October 6th, Lieutenant Governor Malott brought to the public's attention through his office the recent erection by the Tongass Tlingit in April of this year, a new edition of the Seward shame pole. Now, shame poles and blankets, one of which has been on display here at SHI Blanket, are used by Tlingit to announce that a wrong has been committed that has not been paid for or rectified. Should the matter be settled, the shaming object would be taken down or transformed. The original Seward shame pole was first erected by the Tontaquan Tequedi clan to publicize the failure of Seward to provide an appropriate response to a potlatch event accompanied by many gifts that the Tongass leader Ebbets hosted for Seward during his stop in Tongass on his way out of Alaska in 1869. Chief Ebbets, the primary sponsor of that potlatch, sought the political recognition of his tribe and the resources in their territory. In his recent remarks, Lieutenant Governor Malott commented that the pole served as a continuing reminder that the relationship between Alaska Natives and the state of Alaska, as well as the federal government, was a work in progress and required continuing attention. And in his office, there's in fact a very large replication of this image of the top of the recently re-erected shame pole to William Seward that is in the Saxman Totem Park. The individual that we're going to be discussing and looking at, his original given name, as Dr. De Laguna has suggested, was Kaalaxch, a very difficult name for an English speaker to pronounce, but so I called upon Joe Hotch to give me the true sound of the name in Tlingit speech, and he was kind enough to do so. Joe Hotch is a contemporary Jilk Kagwantan leader, greatly respected and admired. Where is, okay. I'm here in Ketchikan. It's June 22nd. I'm with Joe Hotch, and he's going to pronounce for me the name of the Chilkat leader.
Kaalaxch. Kaalaxch.
Thank you, Joe. You guys want to hear it again? You need to get that, all of those sounds. There's a bunch of them in there that are not so easy to. I'm here in Ketchikan. It's June 22nd. I'm with Joe Hotch, and he's going to pronounce for me the name of the Chilkat leader.
Kaalaxch. Kaalaxch.
Thank you, Joe. He is also known as Yakich, which becomes Shotridge or Shotridge over various different anglicizations. His second name is translated as "do not strike a shark on the head," and was given to him by his paternal grandfather, probably somewhat later in life. The implication of Shotridge is that he is, quote, very powerful, not to be trifled with. A less metaphoric meaning is, quote, hard to kill, but an even more descriptive nickname applied to him was, quote, hole in the cheek, unquote. The latter certainly resonates with his being, as at some point in his life a revolver was held to his cheek by an antagonist, and Kaalaxch told him to go ahead and shoot. The shot penetrated and passed through both of his cheeks, causing him to lose upper teeth. He reputedly retrieved the bullet and handed it back to the assailant, saying, "See, you cannot hurt me." The gap and scar were very apparent to those who saw him during the American period. It was a sign of his toughness, his resilience, and his endurance to pain that enhanced his status and reputation across all peoples. George Davidson, who was an American geographer and early with the U.S. Coast and Geodetic Survey, who we'll talk more about later on in terms of his relationship, described Shotridge as a man of commanding presence, nearly 6 feet high, broad of chest, and a well-formed head. He carried a bullet hole in his cheek. He was held to be the greatest warrior and diplomat of the entire tribes north and west of the Sakuan. In our future relations, we found him truthful and absolutely honest. So the region that we are discussing here is one of the Tlingit Kwans, and the Kwan, as most of you know, is a socio-geographic unit comprised of several clans and their recognized traditional territory. The red line in the smaller image in the left indicates the basic division between the Jilkat Kwan and the Jilkut Kwan. Jilkat on the left and Jilkut on the right. Joe Hotch says that the Jilkat and Jilkut Kwans hold a 2.6 million acre dominion that has never been ceded. And this slide is taken from a recent book by Dan Henry called Crossing the Shamans River. It traces the route of John Muir, but shows the basic positioning of the locations that we'll be talking about in the discussions later today. And this is a contemporary map that is particularly illustrative in showing the detail of the various different tributaries of the Chilkat River. And it's also illustrative in showing the boundary between the United States and Canada. For those of you who may not be aware, this particular boundary is also a function of Tlingit initiative. When the boundary tribal the British and U.S. Tribal Boundary Tribunal met, the original boundary was going to be located down here right above Klukwan at a place called Wells, but the Tlingit leaders said, no, that's not where it goes, and they marched the boundary all the way up here. So again, it was Tlingit initiative that was very significantly at play in being able to obtain, in this at least, a recognition in some fashion of their traditional lands. And this is the a view from the approximate area on the east side above in the lower portion of the Chilkat River, looking up river into the drainage as it was today. I was, several years ago, I was honored to be able to be guided up the river by two of the Jilkat Klukwan people, John and David Kaalaxch, who accompanied me and were able to bring a great deal of knowledge to me about the nature of the traditional territory. In the Kwans, although they are termed Kwans, Joe Hotch says that they are one. We are one. The headquarters of the Jilkat is at Klukwan. There are several other villages associated. They controlled most of the Jilkat River and the surrounding lands. And the primary clans were on the Raven side, the Kaalaxch, and on the Wolf Eagle side, the Kagwantan, Shungukadi, and Dakwadi. They owned the Jilkat Pass route up the Jilkat Pass into the interior and its passage over to the Alsek River. That particular route of trade and transport had been in use for several hundred years, as is clearly evident from several lines of evidence, including the biology associated with a man who was discovered there and his DNA. On the other side of the peninsula is the Jilkut Kwan region. Two villages associated with it are Ilkut, Chilkut proper, and Yandastucky. Clans of this Kwan control the Chilkut River and Lake and the surrounding lands, upland canal into the Dyea and Skagway area. The primary clans on the Raven sides are the Lukakadi, and on the Wolf Eagle, the Kagwantan and Shungukadi. They owned the Chilkoot and White Pass routes to the interior and exercised the same rights of control over that as the Klukwan people of Chilkat did over the Chilkat Trail. Looking first of all at Kaalaxch in cultural context, he was born in 1819. His mother was of the Kagwantan grizzly bear house. He was Ganaktedi Yadi, meaning his father was Ganaktedi, and his father may have been a painter of the rain screen. He may also have been the guide to a Russian exploration up the river in 1838, and he did obtain from them 3 medals that were handed down to Shotridge later in his life. He was raised in a system of obligatory reciprocity. The constant exchange of materials and actions between his father's and mother's clan was observed multiple times each day. He learned about property rights, the highly developed and protected and respected rights that were held by the clans to various different items and areas. He was trained by his uncles, getting up in the morning early, sent down into the cold water, and sometimes beaten. I don't want to use the word beaten, but he was struck with branches to bring about the circulation, of the blood in the context of that. His knowledge, attitude, values, heritages, and motivations would become the responsibility of his uncles to transmit to him. He came to understand that sovereignty over clan, war, peace, ceremony activities resides at the clan and house level with his group. He recognized leadership is both inherited and achieved, so that through his actions, he would establish not only for himself, but as a trustee for those people for whom he was responsible in his clan and house. He further grew up recognizing that wealth generated and distributed status and influence and carried out the obligations. To obtain that wealth, trade was essential for the acquisition of these resources. In addition, he realized that power is distributed among clan leaders. None of them has the power or right to assert dominion over others. Any relationship must be negotiated and decided upon. The protocols and negotiation require this in order. He developed the values of loyalty, respect, balance, courtesy, dignity, generosity. The concepts of shagun and shuka capture the nature of Tlingit reality and the connection of generations through spiritual return and the obligation of contemporaries to act in responsible ways to ensure that continuity. As a young man, he was involved in such activities as the catching and the processing of ulukan. This was the most important resource that the Jilk people had prior to the coming of European trade as a resource for trade with the interior people. It goes back, as I mentioned before, hundreds of years. And these resources would have been boxed up and packed up over what came to be called the grease trails. And these were the trade routes that became the Chilkat Pass. He would have been raised also climbing the surrounding mountains in pursuit, that you can see here, the steep mountainsides, in pursuit of the mountain goat, whose wool is the material of the Chilkat blankets and robes, and which were also a part of that transactions with the interior people. He would have learned about and be the participant in the kuiks, the very important potlatches, the ultimate statement of obligatory reciprocity for the maintenance and social continuity. Very, very importantly, he would have grown up in a house and may have participated in the actual activities associated with the construction of the rain house. So the appreciation for the incredible importance of artistic representation would have been a part of his heritage as well. The artistic creation of aesthetically pleasing forms, things that are beautiful, is highly valued in Tlingit society. Not as an object in and of itself, but as an object of gifting, of the transaction between people in that particular way and between people and the spirits of other beings that are being honored by such art. He was also trained in the Tlingit warrior tradition in order to protect and defend his clan, his community, and their rights. The strong clan identities and the deep loyalties to his clansmen were characteristic. A powerful sense of right and wrong prevailed, and these values often engendered disagreements, disputes, and conflict. These wrongs had to be legally rectified. And there are remarkable stories in Tlingit oral tradition of persons being killed for an action of another clan member as a result of the efforts to reestablish balance. Men wore more metal daggers around their necks, and most had multiple scars on their arms and torsos from fights and battles. They also had headgear and armor for going into battle. They were fully outfitted warriors, were certainly intimidating when they were encountered by others. While oral traditions of warfare are prevalent in Tlingit traditions, William Paul wrote, whose archives are named after him downstairs, the great leader and activist for Tlingit and Haida and Alaska Native lands. He wrote, quote, "There may have been a war of conquest amongst the Tlingit. If so, I never heard of it. Not important to subjugate people. They have rights in their lands. Balance is obtained in other ways." This particular map here was one of the earliest maps. This was made as a result of Commander Lester Beardsley's trip in the Upper Lynn Canal in 1880, which I will talk about later on. And it shows the 4 villages present at that time, although I'm not quite sure that he had the Jilk, Elkut on the right side of the river from other pictures that I've seen. He looks like he got it on the wrong side of the river at that time. Klukwan itself means ancient or eternal town. It sits 22 miles up the Chilkat River, and as such it has the distinction amongst all Tlingit villages of being at a distance from salt water. Being at a distance from salt water provides that as a buffer with regard to the ability of the U.S. Navy to bomb over that distance. So this is an important feature of why that homeland had endured and was able to be protected against all kinds of incursions through time. The original size of the village at the time of contact is uncertain. A Russian exploratory party ascended the river in 1838, reported passing a village where evidence of recent deaths was substantial. Further, it has been estimated that the village of Klukwan, that deaths are probably the result of the die-off beginning in 1836 of the first smallpox epidemic that swept through southeastern Alaska and went on to south central and southwestern Alaska. It's estimated the village was still as large as 3,000 people prior to a second wave of epidemic in 1862, which was also not directly observed by any outsider. It continued at the time of the U.S. jurisdiction to be the largest village in 1867, perhaps 1,500 people and 65 houses. The 1880 census, however, placed the number at about 550. So what we can see is a substantial deterioration that contact brought in the numbers of people living in this part of the world. And these diseases such as smallpox, measles, flu, whooping cough, and others took their toll. Continuing interaction down through Sitka, down into Wrangell, further down the coast into Fort Simpson, all had the potential to bring back various different kinds of diseases that could be realized by the people. Kaalaxch himself, at the time of shortly after contact, owned 3 substantial houses, the largest houses in Klukwan. These are the results, as I'll talk a little bit later on, of the endeavors of his trading activities. The largest of them was 60 by 60, and he had also 2 additional houses in which portions were used for storage of the objects that he obtained. The These are, this is a gross approximation of some of the routes themselves, but as most people should realize, the establishment of these trade routes represents an enormous debt for modern transportation systems that were built on top of those particular understandings about the landscape and how best to move across it. Modern transport depended upon traditional knowledge that was developed and husbanded over centuries. This is the location called Pyramid Harbor, which sits on the west shore at the mouth of the Jilk River. And this particular picture comes after the establishment of the cannery, which you can see down there. But this was a location where the Hudson's Bay Company would come with their trading ships and they would anchor in this particular spot. With the decline of the maritime fur trade for sea otters in the 1810s, the British and American traders shifted to the furs of the terrestrial land animals, beaver, marten, sable, and others. Those traders appeared at the mouth and anchored here, and this would be where the Hudsons, where they were encountered by the various Chilkat and Jilkoot leaders who would come down and engage in trade. The Chilkat and Jilkoot clans had created a powerful wealth-generating system through initiative, establishment of knowledge, organization, and will. In 1848, a Hudson's Bay factor, Robert Campbell, was directed to establish a trading post called Fort Selkirk at the confluence of the Pelly and the Yukon rivers in what is now the traditional territory of Canada. It was located on a traditional meeting site where the Tlingits met the Tutchone and the Tagish to trade. That year, when the Tlingit parties arrived, they were surprised and outraged to find these new competitors in their territory. They warned the HBC to leave and returned the next year with the same message. Finally, Kaalaxch and his father led a party of 27 men, 320 miles up from Klukwan to Fort Selkirk, and finding the HBC still there, destroyed the Hudson's Bay Company and outpost, burning it to the ground on August 21st of 1852. This was, as I mentioned, the third time they came and took this action. No lives were lost. The Tlingits took all of the furs. The HBC factor, Robert Campbell, was put in a canoe and pushed off. Campbell then traveled back east to report what happened to him to the Hudson's Bay Company. He asked to reestablish the fort. They said, no such thing will happen. They did not return to this area for 80 years to come back. So, in the aftermath of that, the control of that trade returned to the hands of the Chilkat and Jilkoot Tlingit people. And so this allowed then, these are the remains of Fort Selkirk that were seen and sketched by, during the quote-unquote U.S. military reconnaissance of Frederick Schwatka in 1883. So in terms of his uprearing and his initiatives and his achievements, Kaalaxch demonstrates a remarkable entrepreneurial vigor in the context of his cultural values and cultural opportunities. He engaged in enormously profitable trade both before and after the destruction of Fort Selkirk. Parties of up to 100 men and women went on the trek that might be up to 2 months round trip. They traded with the Athabascans, the Tutchone and Tagish for several hundred years prior to the coming of the Europeans. They brought the coastal products, ulican oil, and dried salmon exchanged for furs, copper, and tanned skin. Kaalaxch and the other powerful Tlingit leaders, notably sheikhs of the Sakuan, who also ascended during this period of the coastal as opposed to maritime trade, traveled to various locations in southeastern Alaska and beyond where they acquired or traded slaves and other forms of wealth. One of Kaalaxch's wives was the Lukkhadi daughter of sheikhs. So we can see also in his entrepreneurial vigor, what he used is traditional mechanisms of diplomacy, which include intermarrying with individuals of high authority in order to establish a diplomatic route through that particular venue. With the coming of Euro-Americans, trade goods increased enormously, and the Chilkat and Jilkoot drove hard bargains at both ends of the trading circuit. Wealth was distributed through potlatches to all of those participants and helped draw. So the population of Klukwan increased probably from drawing from other portions of southeastern Alaska, and the village expanded through the incredible potency and success of the community. That money, which is very important as well to understand how it is mobilized within the institutions of Tlingit culture, led to the building of those houses, those very large houses that we were talking about, to house clansmen and others, to receive guests to the region, and the commissioning or the patronage of art. As I mentioned before, so critical and essential as a part of the nature of the obligatory reciprocity would have been an absolute aspect of the way in which a wealthy individual such as Kaalaxch conducted himself. S. Hall Young reported that the Kaalaxch storehouses were filled with thousands of Hudson Bay blankets, guns, ammunition, powder, beads, spoons, knives, daggers, bolts of cloth, a welter of other products, and significantly, 100 Jilk blankets. If you can imagine the deployment and the capacity to engage in, you have to be able to support the artists and all of the artisans that he was raised in and able to support through these activities. Following her visit to Klukwan in 1881, missionary Carrie Willard wrote, quote, "We found Klukwan by far the largest Indian village we have seen in Alaska, and the richest and most substantially built, many of the houses elegant in their way. The carvings in many of the largest of these houses were thousands of blankets. 3 of the largest of these houses belonged to Shotridge, and the largest and costliest one he has given to us, to the mission. The next in of value, the chief's treasure house, was made our lodging place." The coming of the Americans. The Tlingits were not present at the transfer ceremony held on October 18th. The German ethnographer Oral Kraus observed concerning the situation, the Tlingits followed the ceremony with great interest. Since they were not allowed in town, they embarked in their canoes and took positions in the harbor from which, in spite of the distance, they had a good view of the proceedings. They had only a vague idea of the implications because of their acquaintance with American whalers. They were not inclined to regard it favorably. They watched the lowering and raising of the flags, listened to the thunder of the cannons, and then quietly withdrew. Bill Holm, the substantial artist, made this poster in 1987 to show this particular occasion. There was also the American midshipman who made the observation, looking at Tlingit's leaders in the Sitka village, who appeared to have serious concerns about the events. At the Indian, quote, "At the Indian village, the head chief hauled down the Russian flag from the staff in front of his house, and after a powwow, the necessary consultation, he hoisted it up again, and they all came to the conclusion that although they had allowed the Russians into the country, they did not agree to give it to everyone that happened along, so Uncle Samuel must move off." Several passages of the Treaty of Cession concerning the status of the Tlingit in the eyes of the signatories are important to consider. The Russians stipulated, and the U.S. accepted on its signature, that the indigenous people of Alaska stood in one of 3 categories of relationship to the Russian government. The Aleuts or the Unanguks and the Alutiks were termed and administered as dependent peoples. The Bristol Bay Yupik and the Dena'ina were termed and administered as semi-dependent peoples. And the Tlingit and Niatna were quote-unquote independent and quote-unquote uncivilized. Independent is the critical word in that particular passage. Another passage, of course, is that would raise great concern, is that of uncivilized tribes would be subject to laws passed about them from time to time. This clearly articulates a subject status, something Tlingit deeply resented and did not expect. If they were to be subjected to the laws, the Tlingit were not citizens and therefore had no rights in the context of the U.S. legal system. The Tlingits then, as we can see, began their objections and continued them on beyond this initial time. In 1869, They expressed their displeasure at the injustice of the U.S. assuming the Russians owned anything. General Jefferson Davis, who was the military commander under Kaalaxch, was made aware on numerous occasions of the Tlingit claims to the area and positions on the presence of Americans. In his final report on being reassigned, I might note as a footnote, to finish the Modoc War in Northern California, Davis remarked that Tlingits believed the region belonged to them. Quote, "The fact is, before the transfer, they looked upon themselves as the de facto rulers of this territory, and the Russians here only by sufferance." Chief Shakes of the Stikines was chosen to represent the Tlingit and traveled to Washington in 1889 to present claims seeking recognition of hereditary rights of ownership to lands and streams and permission to govern themselves and regulate their local and domestic affairs. 10 years later, Chief Johnson traveled to protest and the takeover of Tlingit country and requested that the fishing and hunting grounds of their fathers be reserved for them and their children. Did not seek any payment. And as you've seen, the erection of the shame pole in 1885 is a further expression of these particular positions. So what were the American attitudes and intentions at that particular time, as we can find? Earlier I'd mentioned that Secretary Seward was imbued by the policies of manifest destiny. The Indian wars in the West were at a fever pitch, and the Indians were seen as impediments to be removed so civilization could advance and whites could benefit. The resources were considered open for white appropriation. Army men especially, but also Navy men, came from violent conflicts and wars with American Indians in the Southwest and in the Puget Sound region. The Kakes here from southeastern Alaska were bombarded outside of Port Townsend in 1855. I'm not talking about that event and its furtherance today, but these are examples of the use of U.S. military forces against Tlingit people. General Kaalaxch and General Davis were intent on keeping Alaska safe for whites, but as the Tlingit quickly came to observe, they had no concerns about the killings of Tlingits or other natives. If it was necessary to destroy indigenous people who protested and shot to protect their lives, so be it. Kaalaxch's orders to Davis in regard to the Aboriginal and uncivilized tribes, uncivilized means Tlingits, you will act as their general superintendent. Again, stipulating a relationship of subjection, protecting them from abuse and regulating their trade and intercourse with our own people. If any one of them causes problems, the entire tribe should be held accountable. It may be well to have guns charged with grape and canister always bearing on their village, ready at an instant's warning to destroy them. Secretary's intentions are clear in a speech he gave in 1869 in Sitka following his coming. Seward was speaking to his white base. I use that term reflexively, but the message is ominous and foreboding. Indian peoples, quote, can neither be preserved as a distinct social community nor incorporated into our society. The Indian tribes will do here as they seem to have done in Washington Territory and British Columbia. They will merely serve the turn until civilized white men come. This is the early map from 1869 of Pyramid Harbor, the location where the HBC came, and the USS Saginaw, infamous for the bombing of the Cape Village, made a quick visit to Upper Lynn Canal before going down into that region and produced this map of Pyramid Harbor to show where anchorage could occur. The comment on the map in the upper right-hand corner is telling in terms of how the United States governmental officials regard it. And as you can see, what it says is, this is Chilkat or Chilkat country. Natives are warlike and unfriendly. Tribes quite powerful, numbering 1,500 warriors. Perhaps at one time they did, but they had been diminished somewhat. This comment on the map is another striking indication of the views of the American military on the Jilkat and Jilkoot Tlingit. The terminology is noteworthy, underscoring the dangerous and as Seward indicated, perhaps irredeemable status of the Tlingit. So we now come to the first encounter. Kaalaxch meeting with Captain Howard aboard the USS Lincoln. Howard was the official U.S. spokesman aboard the USS Lincoln on a cruise showing the flags to the villages in southeast Alaska and elsewhere. When the ship headed north, it first encountered Donawak, a very prominent and important chief whose name continues today to reverberate down, of the Jilk Tlingit. Donawak was coming down headed in a large canoe with several others toward the Lincoln as the Lincoln came in up towards Lynn Canal. When Donawak came aboard, he expressed the desire to be recognized by Howard as the contact. Howard told him he was unwilling to deal with him in that status, which was obviously an incredible insult to be so treated at that time. Instead, Howard asked Donawak to send a runner to Klukwan to request Kaalaxch to come down, which he did. The next day, Kaalaxch arrived with 3 large canoes. His canoe was flying the Union Jack. The Union Jack is the flag of Great Britain. What did flying a flag mean? Obviously, this is a circumstance of some differences of cultural communication and meaning. Obviously, Kaalaxch did not regard himself as subject to Great Britain by flying a flag. It represented an association deriving from the trade, not any kind of political jurisdiction. Howard had him come aboard for a meeting. Kaalaxch presented himself in a manner befitting a Tlingit leader of high status, especially in a circumstance of which he was not fully apprised of the meaning of this meeting. He apparently was not dressed in ceremonial regalia, which is an indication that he did not know that this was an occasion of state. Howard regarded him as quote-unquote gruff and stern. This particularly was the result of the fact that when Kaalaxch, who thought this was a trading vessel, requested some liquor for the start of the pleasantries, he was informed they weren't going to be forthcoming. According to Howard, this put him in a displeased mood. Howard then moved into the business of the encounter, explaining who he was and that the U.S. had taken the place of the Russians, and that he should now carry the U.S. flag. This, of course, again could be quite misleading to Kaalaxch, given his experience with the Russians, who had no military or administrative capability outside of Sitka, and he had very limited formal relations with the Russians. At the close of the meeting, Howard presented Kaalaxch with a red coat with gold brocade, a sign, and he also provided tobacco and molasses. He then offered Kaalaxch the U.S. flag to put on his canoe. Kaalaxch took it and handed it down to his men. It was then placed on his canoe. The Union Jack he had been flying was then placed on another canoe. George Davison then reported that they sailed off back to their homeland with both flags flying in the breeze. So 1868 then becomes the calm before the storm. During the tour of the U.S. Lincoln, various Tlingit leaders came aboard and requested political recognition. And in 1868, a number of meetings or councils following this were held in which the Tlingit leaders discussed the primary topic of how to deal with Americans. According to government officials who were made aware of these meetings, the possibility of armed attack was discussed but ultimately decided against. According to Krauss, at first the natives were supposed to have harbored the idea that they would drive away the new invaders. They held a number of meetings for this purpose but were discouraged from any action by the Chilkats, probably Shotridge, who pointed to the fact that the new people had many cannon. And he also recognized that their proclivity to use them was probably pretty high. In 1868, General Davis made a trip to the mouth of the Chilkat River for several purposes, one of which was to meet Kaalaxch personally, but one also presumes to get a sense of the military landscape. And he certainly recognized the extraordinary difficulties that mounting any assault upon Klukwan would entail for a U.S. military that was relatively, at that stage, undermanned. He was also very interested in the fur trade. From whence did this wealth of these people and the status of this man come? So he had learned from Davidson, who got it from the HBC, that in the previous year, over 2,500 pelts of marten and sable had been acquired from the Chilkats at substantial prices. So it was this economic surveillance that was also a part of what was going on. 1869 then became a pivotal year, one of the pivotal years in Kaalaxch's life. He was invited by General Davis, along with the other Chilkat and Chilkoot leaders, to Sitka in December, ostensibly to celebrate the new year, but also Davis wanted him to allow George Davidson's scientific party to come the next summer to observe a solar eclipse. The leaders were invited by Davis to visit in his quarters, and he served them alcohol. One of the leaders had a little too much to drink, as some of us are prone to do from time to time. There then followed an incident between the chief, Kolchika, and a sentry, which led to the killing of a Chilkat man. The Chilkats then armed themselves and prepared for reprisal, but they retreated to the Sitka village. General Davis then trained the gunboats on the village and demanded that the chiefs come forward and turn themselves in. At that time is when the Kakes departed the village, and 2 of their men in their canoes were shot. And that's what led to the subsequent killings by the Kakes as a part of balance and led to their bombing. Kaalaxch and the other chiefs were incarcerated by Davis, and although Kaalaxch was not involved in the incident at all, he spent 10 days in jail on what George Davidson termed a quote-unquote petty offense. Davis must have sent George Davidson to his cell to discuss the upcoming scientific meeting. And when he made his visit to Kaalaxch, the activities were discussed, and indeed General Davis indicated that if Kaalaxch would agree to allow them to come and provide support and protection, then he would release the Chilkat leaders. So he's already using duress to obtain some guarantee. Kaalaxch, when he did accept those particular conditions, and he and his party returned back to Klukwan at that time. In February of that year, the USS Saginaw bombed 3 Kake villages as the aftermath to their taking of revenge for the loss of life in Sitka. There's more to that, a footnote on that, but I don't have time to talk about that now. So he became aware, as he predicted in 1868, that these people were wont to use their violence in certain circumstances. So August 7th, 1869 is the date of the actual solar eclipse. Interestingly, Davis offered a military escort to Davidson to be taken up there, but he refused it. He was then only going to be given a single longboat. Kaalaxch was contacted, and he came down with a large canoe and ferried all of Davidson's crew and gear to Klukwan several days before the eclipse. He housed them in one of those large structures in Klukwan, and he fed the entire party. The activities preparing for and surrounding the eclipse placed Davidson in the center of the event, orchestrating the activities of several assistants that were observed. And fundamentally, then, this particular circumstance was carried out. In 1901, Davidson noted that this was carried out completely. One important event that occurred at this time, a second important event, was the discovery that the reason that Kaalaxch had, Secretary of State Seward and Davis, General Davis, arrived later and were at the actual event. And so Seward this was his first contact. And at this particular time then, Kaalaxch showed his other initiative. After the conclusion of the eclipse ceremony, in which Davidson and others suggested that the Tlingits regarded him as a powerful medicine man, Kaalaxch immediately turned and said to Seward, please join me in the house. And once they came down into his house, Kaalaxch's agenda occurred immediately. He was pursuing peace. And so what he initiated was a process then of encountering Seward and Davis to help settle an ongoing dispute between the Chilkat and the Sitka. And what happened was that Seward then offered to provide the materials, 36 blankets to settle it, and he created a ceremonial event in Sitka in which the transaction between the parties occurred. This was most definitely not a Klukwan, but what it did was establish the way in which the Tlingit might be able to use the circumstances of the United States to pursue the cessation of internal conditions. And so this was one of Kaalaxch's most significant innovations was the utilization of this process. So he recognized conflict between ourselves can engender enormous problems and lead to our discussion. He then utilized that mechanism to create, I'm not going to have time because of the time that's here to talk about his creation of his map. And this one here is the map that he and two of his wives drew after the eclipse events. That shows all of the interior routes that they utilized going up into Fort Selkirk and beyond. And this was then turned later on in 1901 after he had other information. Davidson went back and re-examined the map and said that it was a remarkable compilation in terms of the scale. This is a reproduction of that map as it was done here, as it was reproduced in 1865. So this shows the route from Klukwan over to the Kaalaxch, up to Fort Selkirk, and all the way over into out in the territory of White River, so an enormous territory. And this is the actual distance covered and all the place names that were on that. Now I just want to conclude in terms of one final remark here about the treaty. And this is one of the things that he engaged in was the negotiation in 1876 of a treaty under the jurisdiction of the United States by the cover of the United States. He requested that the U.S. Army provide for a linkage between themselves and the Stikines. And so a discussion occurred and in Wrangell, the Chilkats went down, they discussed and went into the Klukwan, the peacemaking ceremony. And following the conclusion of the Klukwan, this document was signed. And I found one of the originals of this document back in let me just conclude because as Dr. Worl has pointed out, this treaty which was initiated by Kaalaxch based upon the Sitka arrangement, utilizing the U.S. as an intermediary, not as a replacement for the ongoing negotiations of Tlingit settlements, just as an intermediary. This gentleman here, Captain J.B. Campbell, if you'll note critically for certain historians, note how he entitles himself. Okay, long denied in much American historical literature is this particular recognition that these are Indians. Alaska Natives are Indians. What does that mean? All of Indian law applies to Indians. I have the honor to advise you of the satisfactory adjustment. After delay and usual amount of talk, which is a Klukwan characteristic, they have reached an agreement. And here is the agreement. This is very important to read very carefully. Stikine and Chilkat tribes, desiring a renewal of the peace and friendship heretofore existing, have amicably adjusted all matters of difference that during the last 12 years have led to frequent acts of retaliation and war. And we, their authorized representatives, do hereby pledge the good faith of the people of our respective tribes to the maintenance of this compact of peace. Understand, there is no invocation with regard to the sovereignty of either of those clans and clan leaders, and no notion that they should open their territories to anyone. It is simply a commitment that they will have reestablished the peaceful relationship. Now, what happened is that the U.S. Navy then, when other Tlingits, including the Stikines and Sitka people, attempted to use a similar process, began a wedge operation of inserting U.S. sovereignty into these treaties, saying that the people had to open their territories, that they could not settle their disagreements through their use of traditional means, and from then on, it escaped from the mechanisms by which Kaalaxch had sought to engage and produce an innovation that made sense in the contents of how things were going on. Given the time frame, I'm going to have to end this just by pointing to when I found this particular treaty in 2012. It was in fact broken in the National Archives at the bottom. These pieces of hot wax, you can see Chief Jakes are the way in which they used the hot wax to place your thumbs on it at that time. Those had broken away, and ultimately they restored it after the Treaty of Curation. And that's what happened. I'm not going to have time to go into, because of the time this career goes on, but there are continuing activities of engagement in which, this is the first time in which Shotridge in 1880 made a short-term agreement with Beardsley to take some prospectors up the river for one occasion. And in that agreement, it was included that he would be able to maintain the Chilkat guides, and packers had to be paid. No other entrance would be allowed, and that further no whites would be allowed to settle. The 1879, this is where I'll end it. This is the only picture that I've been able to identify and is known of Kaalaxch. And his son, this is when during the 1880 Beardsley trip, this Master Heinous in the middle was sent up there, and if you look carefully, I might see something about the hole in the cheek. And that's, can you see? There it is. The plug that filled that particular hole, located in that particular. Eventually, as I commented earlier, in the period of 1880 was really important in that Kaalaxch, Danawak, Skundu made an agreement to allow a trading post to come to Deschutes. That was also constrained by Beardsley. And ultimately then the missionary and the school was allowed. Kaalaxch was certainly very interested in building a bridge. The problems of alcohol, the recognition of the very dangerous protection of traditional rights, all were a part of the kind of decision-making matrix in which his consultations had to occur. A very sad sort of footnote in the aftermath of at least my viewing is that in 1890, an American entrepreneur named Jack Dalton entered this situation in the early 1890s, just before the gold rush, and he established a route up the west side of the Chilkat River, starting in Pyramid Trail. Notice it's on the west side. Wonder why it was on the west side. Anybody have any idea what? And then when he passed above Wells, he crossed over. And he had the audacity to call it the Dalton Trail, when in fact it reproduced and went back over the exact lands that were originally a part of the Chilkat Trail, that they were denied the right to control and present tolls on. And this is the enormous hypocrisy that this particular document indicates. The U.S. government authorized Jack Dalton to charge tolls for travel over the Chilkat Trail. And there you see the listing of those particular toll charges that went on for a period of time. I guess it's lucky that Kaalaxch did not have to think or feel about these outcomes. In the context of his endeavors, he was both a man of great Tlingit classic vigor and an enormous figure in transition, not only in terms of the overall relations, but also in the transition of his own people to find a productive future for the Chilkat people in the face of the difficulties that they faced at that time. So thank you for your remarks. I'm sorry there's some things I had to not get into, so thank you very much.
First of all, I have to say thank you, Steve, for this wonderful presentation. I have to say for myself and probably other Chilkats that this is still meaningful to us. We still have unresolved issues that we have to deal with. You know, yes, come Chilkat. My brother. I mean, this is our home. You know, we feel very strongly. We feel very strongly about our homeland. And I know that there's been a lot of celebrations and discussions around this Treaty of Cession. But I feel yet that we haven't had a chance to express our true feelings about these issues and what happened and what still needs to be happened. So the work of Dr. Langdon in bringing this lecture here to us is one step in moving forward, because we really need to get the whole history out. And we just had a board meeting, and our board of trustees said that it shall be a priority for SHI to work on the history of Alaska Natives. And this is one piece, you know, that definitely has to be on there. So if I see another Tlingit over there that should be up here, you should come too, because we want to honor Kiksadi. Kiksadi? Are you Kiksadi? No, back there. Come, you. Haku, yeah.
He's
Dakdainton, Haku. So, in appreciation, you know, for all that you've done, and we recognized, you know, that at this last AFN conference, that Steve did receive the Denali Award. I wasn't able to be there, but I watched it with great pride. And I saw that he was recognized, you know, from all across the state. But if any region, you know, should be there stepping forward, it has to be from our region, Southeast Alaska, since most of the work that Steve has done has been in Southeast Alaska. He's brought to our knowledge, to our awareness, many things about our culture that people might not have otherwise known. Things about the fish traps and how Native people were able to utilize the environment in a sustainable way. So we who are here representing all of the Tlinkits really wanted to recognize you and present you with this copper.
Wow.
And the copper says, go ahead. It says Steve's name on there. At Jeshani Gun Jeshaguni Ish. At Jeshaguni Ish. Is that right? Okay, can I hear people say it? At Jeshaguni Ish. At Jeshaguni Ish. At Jeshaguni Ish. He was given this name, which means father of the implement, by the Kaalaxch Adi. We have a Kaalaxch Tedi here, but no Kaalaxch Adi. But
They're the same. I was given this by Kaalaxch Tedi.
We still wanted to bring his name out so that everybody will know his Tlingit name and that he is also with the Kaalaxch Adi. So if we could put that on, and then.
Wow.
Since his delivery was on the Chilkat, we thought that he should have a symbol from the Chilkats. So, beautiful. We're very proud of all of the work that you've done, Steve, and thank you for all of your work. it's so meaningful to us. I don't know if you know the impact it has on all of us. So.
Good, Chish.
I'm asking my brother if he wants to say anything.
I was just gonna say, we should get him a picture in front of the house, just like we did in the old days.
Yeah,
do that.
oh
We'll do
yeah,
that.
absolutely, in front of the house.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful, yes. If I might respond, I'm hard pressed to have any words to convey my thanks. Gunal Shish, as you know how much this has meant. Could you leave that up there for a minute, Will? I want to talk about that. That picture. But I'm sorry for the interruption. But Gunal Shish to all the Chilkats for coming, to SHI, to you for your support and your sponsorship. And I have done this as a matter of not professional recognition, but of life's calling, of commitment to bring these stories in such a way that the people can have them and benefit from them in ways that they have been denied for way too long. So I'm deeply moved and honored, and as I said, Gunal Shish to everyone for this particular honor, and you particularly. Thank you so much. Yes.